Would you welcome to Bedford, Indiana, from North Carolina, originally from Jersey, I don't know how you say it in Jersey, Dr. Frank Turek.
Thanks, Ken. Well, actually, Ken left out my newest book. It's called 10 Steps to Humility and How I Made It in 7. That's the brand new one, so better get that down. Hey, who made all that food? I know Kathy and Susan were involved. Who else? Raise your hand if you had anything to do with the food. Come on. Whoever made the food, that was excellent. Ladies and gentlemen. Huh? In fact, we may take a break in 15 minutes to have seconds. What do you think? Absolutely. Yeah, oh yeah, and buy my book. Yeah, that's right. Well, what are we talking about here tonight? We're talking about I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and when you call something I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, it's going to be extremely controversial. So it's absolutely critical that you listen closely, because I don't want you walking out of here thinking I said something I did not say. If you don't listen closely, the results can be disastrous.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So what are you guys thinking about? Well, my first question is, why are you here? I don't mean why are you here tonight. I mean, why are you here on earth? What is the purpose of your life? This is the interactive portion of the program. Why are we here?
To know, love, and serve God.
To know, love, and serve God. Well, how do we know that's true? The Catholic said it. Well, that's it then. Good night, everyone. I mean, what evidence do we have? What evidence do we have that there's a God? All right, well, now you're getting into some evidence now. We got the creation, there must be a creator. But I mean, what really is the purpose of your life? Is your purpose just to get a whole bunch of stuff and then you die? I mean, is life a glorified Monopoly game? Get a whole bunch of stuff now because when the game is over, it's all going to go back in the box? Is that what life's all about? I mean, one preacher to his congregation put it this way. He said, one day you are going to die. And they're going to put you in your best suit or your best outfit. They're going to put you in a box. They're going to dig a hole somewhere. They're going to lower that box into that hole. Then they're going to throw dirt in your face and come back to the church and eat potato salad. Is that it? You just take a dirt nap for all eternity. There is no real objective purpose to life. You just die and become worm food. Actually, Francis Crick, who looks a little creepy to me, helped discover the DNA molecule, and he says there is no purpose to life. In fact, he was an atheist, a materialist, and he had an astonishing hypothesis. In one of the last books he ever wrote, here's what he said in this book. The astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity, and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. In other words, you are nothing but a molecular machine. You are a moist robot. You think you have free will, but you don't really have free will. Why? Because all that exists are materials. And every thought you have and everything you do is really the result of the laws of physics. This is the predominant or dominant view that atheists have today. There is no immaterial realm. Everything's made of molecules, which means you don't really have free will, which means you're not really thinking anyway, you're just reacting, you're not reasoning, you're just a moist robot. Now, of course, if Crick is right, then there is no purpose to life. If everything that exists is in nature, then there is no supernature. There is no supernatural. There is no God. Nothing exists but molecules. I actually think there is a real purpose to life, an objective purpose, not just my opinion, but a real purpose. And you can find that purpose in this ancient collection of manuscripts we put under one binding we now call the Bible. Now, of course, when you say that in today's culture, people go, what are you, nuts? You actually think this book is true? Can't be true. It's got miracles in it. We don't believe in miracles anymore. It was written down by religious people. They're biased. You can't trust them. Right? That's what Ken says. You can't trust religious people. He knows. He goes to church here. Come on. He knows. Right? The pastor and the elder sitting in the front row. Yep, can't trust religious people. How can you believe this book? I actually think it's not all that difficult to show that this book is indeed true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that Christianity is true. In other words, if you ask these 4 questions and get evidence, so you can conclude that the answers to the 4 questions are yes, then you can show beyond any reasonable doubt that Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yes, of course. That is actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. if you're an insomniac. DirecTV channel 378. How many people here have DirecTV? Can I show your hands, please? DirecTV. 3 of us. Come on, friends, don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get out and have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. It's on Roku. Have you heard of Roku? Yeah. You got Roku? NRB Network? And if you don't have Roku, you can go to this website. That's our website at those times because it'll be streaming live. So you can watch it live, or you can get DVDs off our website. We're also on radio every Saturday morning. It's on a bunch of stations around the country. But that's podcasted. It's on iTunes. You can listen to it anytime you want. It's also on our free app, which I'll tell you about later. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. You notice Ken had introduced it. That tonight we're going to cover truth. Tomorrow morning we're going to cover God. And then tomorrow night we're going to cover miracles and the New Testament. Okay? But why are these the 4 questions? Well, obviously, if there is no truth, or if it's just true for you but not for me, or all truth is relative, then quite obviously the Bible can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then any book written by an atheist can't be true either. Right? So we're going to deal with that question tonight. Second question, does God exist? You can't have a word from God if there's no God. If there's no God, throw the Bible away and every other book that talks about God. But I hope to show you, particularly tomorrow morning, that there really is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, sustaining creator. We're going to look at 3 arguments tomorrow for this being. These arguments are taught in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you don't even need to quote any of the Bible to show that God exists. The third question is, are miracles possible? Obviously, the Bible can't be true if miracles are not possible, but I hope to show you tomorrow that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. We'll see that evidence tomorrow. Then and only then can we get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, God exists, and miracles are possible, then we can see if we have an accurate, historically reliable account of miracles occurring in the first century to a man named Jesus and his apostles in the 27 handwritten Greek manuscripts we put under one binding we now call the New Testament. Do these documents actually tell us the truth? Or as I mentioned earlier, were they written down much later by religious zealots who embellished it and they made it up? I think tomorrow night we'll see that the documents that we now call the New Testament are very reliable. That what they tell us actually did occur. And if that's the case, then Christianity is true. If Jesus really died and rose again, Christianity is true, okay? So, as Ken mentioned, we're going to try and cover this over the next few sessions, but there's no way I'm going to be able to cover all the material. Actually, I probably could cover it all because I'm originally from New Jersey, okay? I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts at 350. All right? So if you can't keep up, the books are available on the book table. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and then Stealing from God is the new one. By the way, Stealing from God is not about tithing. People are going, is your book about tithing? No! Not that there's anything wrong with tithing, okay? I'm just saying. The subtitle is Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. Whenever atheists open their mouth and try and argue against God, they're stealing elements of God's universe to say he doesn't exist. An atheist is someone like who says, I don't believe in guns, and then he tries to steal your gun and shoot you with it. Okay? That's what the book points out. It also summarizes this book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Now, also there's a 12-part DVD set back there that's over 7 hours long. It's filmed for TV, so there's Q&A. It goes through all this material in a lot more detail than we can cover here this morning. Now, if you don't want to get any of that, that's fine. All you need to do is go to this website, crossexamine.org/CP. That stands for College Prep. We do a lot of college events. And if you just send me your email address, I'm going to email you this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format, okay? I'm going to go too quickly. You're not going to be able to take notes or get everything that we talk about here. That's all right. I'm going to send you the PowerPoint presentation, even more than I can verbally go through, so you can look at it at your leisure in a PDF form. But you got to write that down and send us your email address and we'll get it to you. Does that sound okay? All right. Now, if I time this just right, we'll have absolutely no time for questions. No. We'll have time for questions a little bit later today, okay? A little bit later tonight. What we're going to cover tonight is just this point right here. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? Yeah. All right. Whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. That was pretty weak, Bedford. I don't think he said it like that. The movie would have gone nowhere if he said, you can't handle the truth. Let's try that again. Colonel, I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Much better, much better, much better. That's how he said it. Well, you know, there's a lot of people out there that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, there is no truth, all truth is relative. What's an easy definition of truth? Easy definition of truth is telling it like it is, right? Or truth is what corresponds to reality or corresponds to its referent. Like if I say, this is a Bible, when referring to it, that would be true. If I say it's a Quran, that wouldn't be true. You say, Frank, I came out on a Saturday night for this? Come on. Why are you starting here? Why? This is so obvious. Because our first duty in today's culture is to state the obvious. There's a lot of people out there denying the obvious. Now, hold on to this concept of truth here. We're going to come back to it. We need to, for a minute, to talk about the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction helps us discover what is false. What is the law of non-contradiction? It is a fundamental law of logic that you've been using your entire life. You may not have even thought about it, but you've been using it. It's one of the basic rules of thought. You can't prove this law, you just know it. It's a foundational principle. There's nothing underneath it, it's just there. And this law says that opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, the earth can't be both round and not round at the same time and in the same sense, right? I mean, it's either round or it's not round, but it's not both. You with me? Easy example of this, you're walking down the street, you see a friend of yours, you heard a rumor that maybe, you see a couple, and you heard a rumor that maybe the woman is pregnant. So you go, I understand you're expecting. And she says yes, and he says no. You wouldn't go, well, thank you very much. Right? You'd go, maybe she hasn't told him, but you wouldn't say they could both be true, right? She's either pregnant or she's not pregnant, but she's not both, right? You with me? That's what this is. Now, some will say, okay, I got the law of non-contradiction. But the law of non-contradiction does not apply to religious claims. Oh, actually it does. Let me give you the most basic religious claim out here. Does God exist? This man over here is the most popular atheist in the world today. His name is Richard Dawkins. He's taught for many years at Oxford University. He wrote the book, The God Delusion. He thinks you're deluded if you believe in God. The man on the left over here is Oxford professor John Lennox, who also teaches at Oxford, as I mentioned, and he's a believer, he's a Christian, he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet and one of the brightest. These two men have had debates before. By the way, if you ever really want to see a great debate, just Google this. Lennox-Dawkins debate. You'll find it somewhere on the internet. And it's not really a dueling speech debate. You know how some debates are where one guy gives a speech and 20 minutes later his buddy gets or his opponent gets up and gives another speech and they... No, it's not a dueling speech debate. They're just having a conversation back and forth. Riveting. And Lennox is such a warm, pleasant man. Some liken him to like a Santa Claus figure. You know, he's just, you can't not like John Lennox. On the other hand, Richard Dawkins is kind of a sourpuss. And one reviewer of the debate, they've had several debates, one reviewer said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins was like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. Right? Anyway, both of these men are making a claim about God, right? Now here's my question. Can both of these men be right about this particular topic? No, they both can't be right. If Lennox is right, Dawkins is wrong. If Dawkins is right, Lennox is wrong, but they both can't be right. Right? So who's right here? Yeah, you're having trouble. I'll give you a hint. It is Lennox, all right? Some of you are going, is it Lennox? Yeah, Lennox is right, okay? I'm going to give you evidence tomorrow that Lennox is right. The only thing I want to point out here is that they both can't be right. You with me? One's right, the other's wrong. Now, this law of non-contradiction is undeniable. Even those who deny it use it. Suppose your friend says something that you know violates the law of non-contradiction, and you say to your friend, hey, that can't be true because it violates the law of non-contradiction. And your friend says, I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. What should you say to him? You're going to say, you do believe in it. He's going to say, no, I don't. You're going to say, you do believe in it. He's going to say, no, I don't. You're going to say, you do believe in it. He's going to say, no, I don't. And you know why I know you believe in it? Because you're using it right now to contradict me. Right? Every time he says, no, I don't, he's using the law of non-contradiction. In fact, you can't think a thought without the law of non-contradiction. Every thought you have opposes some other thought. If you think God exists, the opposite of that is God doesn't exist. If you think someone's pregnant, the opposite of that is they're not pregnant. Every thought you have is the result of the law or using the law of non-contradiction. In fact, the law of non-contradiction is to thinking what your eyes are to seeing. You can't see without eyes, and you can't think without the law of non-contradiction. Now, there was a great Muslim philosopher a number of years ago who had a fabulous way of convincing those who denied the law of non-contradiction that they were wrong. His name is Avicenna. Here's the way Avicenna put it. He said, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. Right? Being beaten and not being beaten, they're opposites. You got it? Now that's a little extreme, but you get the idea, right? All right, now let's go back to this concept of truth here for a second. I'm here to say that all truth is absolute or objective, if you want to put it that way. Something that is true for all persons at all times in all places. There are no relative truths. You say, well, I can think of a relative truth. Like what? Well, like I feel warm right now. Or I'm sure the people in Alaska, they feel cold. No, that's not relative. It's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that when referring to you right now, you feel warm. Remember, truth is what corresponds to its referent, if in fact you do feel warm. And it's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places when referring to the people in Alaska right now, they feel cold, if in fact they do. Truth is objective or absolute. Now, when you say that all truth is absolute, some will claim that you are very judgmental. In fact, they will say, you know what? There is no truth. Or they might say, you can't know truth. Or they might say, all truth is relative. Or my favorite one, it's true for you, but not for me. Well, you think Christianity is true, but Buddhism is true for me. Well, what do you say to that? Or they might say, No one has the truth. Or if they really get annoyed with you, they might say, you know what, you just ought not judge. Especially if you're a Christian. You ever hear somebody say you ought not judge? Yeah. Jesus said don't judge. What are you doing judging, you hypocrite? You've heard that before. Now, if you can't find fault with any of these claims here, then you can't say that Christianity is true. And if you're an atheist and you can't find fault with any of these claims, you can't say atheism's true. So there's got to be a problem with these claims, right? What's the problem? Can anyone see the problem? What is it? They are making truth claims. What law are they violating? Every one of these statements violates the what law? The law of non-contradiction we just went through. That's why we had to bring it up. In fact, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about the entire 2 days, if you just get this one idea down, it'll be worth your time. I tell people, half of what you need to know in order to show that Christianity is true and defend it against attacks is what we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes. If you get good at applying the law of non-contradiction, you're going to become a fearless apologist. What's an apologist? Does anyone know? It's not saying you're sorry. What is it? What does it mean? Yeah, defend the faith. It comes from 1 Peter 3:15. In Greek, it means where Peter says, he says that we're supposed to give an answer, always ready to give an answer for the hope that we have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Now, the gentleness and respect thing is hard for me because, as I say, I originally am from New Jersey. Okay, so that's hard. But we're always supposed to give an answer. It means to give a reason. Christianity is not this blind faith nonsense we hear about. It's faith is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe. So what evidence do we have for Christianity? We're going to get into it later. But if you get good at applying the law of non-contradiction, you're going to be a fearless apologist. And here is the key to doing it. This is what you need to do. Your greatest tool in answering these objections is to apply the claim to itself. Apply the claim to itself. And once you get good at doing this, I'm telling you, it's going to save you a lot of time. Why? Because there's so many false ideas out there that you'll be able to notice right away, hey, that's false, here's why. Save you a lot of time. You don't want to go down these intellectual cul-de-sacs, right? In fact, entire religions are intellectual cul-de-sacs. They're just self-defeating. They can't be true. Let me give you an example of a self-defeating statement. If someone were to walk in here and say, I can't speak a word in English, what would you say to them? Yeah, didn't you just say that in English? Can everyone see that's a self-defeating statement? Or it's like saying there are no sentences in the English language longer than 3 words. You just said one. Or it's like saying my brother is an only child. Or my parents had no kids that lived. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one. Actually, my youngest son, his favorite one, he's got a new one now. This will take a minute to get. This is his favorite self-defeating statement. He says, Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. After all, he killed Hitler. Yogi Berra, who just died this week, had a good one. He said, half the things I said, I never said. Or he said, no one ever goes down there anymore, it's too crowded. You got it? These are self-defeating. That's why they're funny, okay? All right, now, this process of turning a claim on itself, in the book, we call it the Roadrunner tactic. Why do we call it the Roadrunner tactic? Because what's Wile E. Coyote's only mission in life? Catch the Roadrunner and eat him. But Roadrunner's just a little bit too fast, a little bit too smart. Just as it looks like Coyote's about to grab him, Roadrunner stops short of the cliff, Coyote goes blowing by him, and then he's hanging in midair until he realizes what? He's got no ground to stand on, and he plummets to the valley floor in a heap. That's exactly what you can do to people who utter self-defeating statements. You can show them the claim has no ground to stand on, that it's foundationless. If it violates the law of non-contradiction, it can't be true. So, let's go through some of these, because this will demonstrate that there is truth out there. If someone were to ever say to you, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? You want to apply the claim to itself. Yeah, what would you ask? Would you just apply the claim to itself? Say, is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true. But it claims to be true. Did I say that right? This is known as a self-defeating statement. To claim there is no truth is to utter a truth claim. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Again, we call this the roadrunner tactic. And with this one little tactic of turning a claim on itself, you look like a super genius. All right? You can wow your friends with this, okay? How about somebody says this? There's no such thing as absolute truth. Someone were to say this to you, what question would you ask them? Apply the claim to itself. What would you ask them? Yeah, say, is that absolutely true? If you want to have some fun, you could say, you're absolutely sure? See, because that's an absolute truth claim. To say there are no absolute truth claims is like to say I can't speak a word in English. Once again, you look like a super genius. This one is one of my favorites. It's true for you, but not for me. Now, what do you say to that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, what question should you ask them? Anyone got it? Go ahead. It might, well, close. Close. If somebody says, what?
If it's true for me, it has to be true for you.
Okay, so how would you put that to include everyone?
Oh, if it's always true,
You're on it.
then it can't not be true for me.
Okay. So you could easily show that this is self-defeating by simply saying, if they say it's true for you but not for me, say, hey, is that true for everybody? Right? It's true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it. But that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Well, kind of, yeah. It's a little bit stronger than an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp, you mean? Yeah. It's a little bit stronger than that. It's an actual contradiction. But anyway, to say true for you but not for me is to say that this is true for everyone. See that? That defeats itself. Now, I go to a lot of churches and I normally, well, actually, you know, there's a more fun way of dealing with this one. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller one day and say, look, the economy's down, I need some extra money. I'd like $100,000 out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $47.12 in your account. Never fear. Just say, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? No, if there's only $47.12 in your account, that's true for all people at all times and all places when referring to your account at that time. It's just true. Or let's say you're going a little fast down Highway 37 out here. Cop sees you, pulls you over, says, you know, you were going 90 in a 55. Very easy to get out of a ticket. You simply go, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. Can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 90, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. It's just true. Now, as I mentioned, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you believe this book is true? And most people will say, well, yes. And then I'll ask them, why? You know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not this book is true? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? Your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, well, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? This is a critical point. Because there are two kinds of faith. There's belief that and there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible is true. That's what we mean by apologetics, getting evidence. But all the belief that in the world won't get you saved according to Christian theology. You have to go from belief that to trust in. You see, James, the half-brother of Jesus, says, even the demons know that God exists, but they tremble. Why do they tremble? Because they don't trust in Jesus for salvation. They know intellectually better than we do that God exists, but they don't trust in him. So you have to go from belief that which is just intellectual to belief in, which is not just intellectual, but it's also volitional. It's also of the heart. The first is of the head. The second is of the head and the heart. In fact, I had a debate at University of Michigan a few years ago with a atheist by the name of Eddie Tabash. He is a Beverly Hills attorney. And during our interactions, we had the opportunity to ask one another questions. And here was his question to me. He said, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of suffering. Toward the end of her life, someone offered her the gospel, but she rejected it, and then she died. Is she in hell right now? Wow. Eddie knows how to ask a tough question, right? Especially in front of a secular audience. So I said to him, I said, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not. But if she did not, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will. You see, what's the assumption behind the question? The assumption behind the question is that everybody wants to go to heaven. That's not true. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. There have been people running from Jesus their entire lives. They don't want to have anything to do with him. And they keep running and they keep, what's God going to do? When they die, he's going to say, sorry, you got to be with me. In fact, I asked this question to the audience that night at University of Michigan, but I'll just pretend you're the University of Michigan audience. Here's the question I asked. This is first to the ladies. Ladies, have you ever had a man pursue you romantically whom you did not want to date? Some are going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. Whenever I ask that question, the women always giggle and the men look at their shoes. They're like, is she looking at me right now? Well, suppose this man pursues you, he keeps asking you out, you finally get a little tired of it, ladies, so you say, look. I like you, but only as a friend. Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Newsflash, men, if you ever hear this from a woman, move on. She's not interested. In fact, little secret, she doesn't even like you as a friend. Okay? She's just trying to be nice. She's just trying to get rid of you, because if she truly liked you as a friend, she'd be interested. But she's not. So anyway, suppose that doesn't deter him. He continues to pursue, he gets to the point where he says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Can he force you to love him? No, love by definition must be freely given. Love has to be free. Otherwise, it's not love. You're not robots. So if he truly did love you, ladies, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's exactly what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us Christ. He sends us a TV broadcast, a radio broadcast, a Bible, missionaries, all sorts of different ways to get our attention. In some countries now where it's closed to the gospel, particularly in Muslim countries, there are reports of dreams and visions about Jesus. He'll get you the information you need to be saved, but if you keep saying, no, I don't want you, then God will let you go. In fact, Paul talks about this in Romans 1, that people keep going their own way, and God will eventually say, I'm going to give you up to your own desire, and he will let you go. So this is what God does. He doesn't force himself on us. He gives us the freedom to either accept him or reject him. Now you say, well, how is it fair to punish somebody in hell? First of all, you're appealing to a moral standard when you say it's unfair. If God is the moral standard, and if God isn't the moral standard, there is no objective moral standard. If God is the moral standard, he's ultimately going to be fair. We know that. But secondly, every person right now, whether they're believers or not, experiences some of the goodness of God, right? Amen. Natural revelation. Everybody experiences life. Everyone experiences the warmth of the sun, the life that comes from the rain. His rain falls on the just and the unjust, right? Many of us experience love and relationships, and even though we're not Christians, we experience all this. All this ultimately all good things come from God. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no goodness. All the goodness is taken away. There is no love. There are no relationships. There is no hope. There is no future. There's nothing but stone cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That's hell. That's why Paul describes hell as separation from God. You're separated from God because you have separated yourself from God. Look, if there is a God and there is an afterlife, there's only two possible destinations. You're either going to be with God in the afterlife or you're not. If you're with God, you're in heaven. If you're not with God, you're in hell by your own choice. That's not just true for me or true for you. That's true, but you get to decide where you're going to go. So, God won't force you into heaven against your will. If you have belief that, and everybody at some point knows that there's a creator. They might not know about Jesus, but they know there's a creator God. But you don't want to trust in him, that's your call. In fact, marriage, as you know, is an illustration of our ultimate union with Christ. And marriage can be demonstrated or can be used as an example to show the difference between belief that and belief in. When I first met my wife 30 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife. But all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. See, that's the difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that, the head, belief in is the head and the heart. So God is fair. He's not going to force anybody into his presence against his will, or against your will, I should say. How about this one? You're going to hear this one a lot. There's no truth in anything but science. In fact, when you go to college, some will say this. This is called scientism. We get all our truth from science. Can anyone see the problem with it? Apply the claim to itself. What's the problem? You're catching on now. What question would you ask somebody? Yeah, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. And you can't do science without philosophy. In fact, you can't even read the newspaper without philosophy. You can't read the Bible without philosophy. You know, we as Protestants have this saying, sola scriptura, right? We have to be careful how we define that. We really mean the Bible alone, not church tradition. But we don't mean all you need to know is the Bible. Because you wouldn't even know what the Bible meant unless you knew the laws of logic, unless you knew grammar, unless you knew certain aspects of reality, right? You have to use reason even to know the Bible. So sola scriptura doesn't mean all I need is my Bible. It means that you don't have any other source of special revelation other than the Bible. Because God has written two books. What are the two books God has written? No. I'm talking the whole Bible is one. What's the other one? Yes, it's sometimes called natural revelation, the book of nature. The book of nature. So he's written the Bible, yes, but he's also written the book of nature. And in order to understand what the book of the Bible says, you've got to understand what nature says. Because you wouldn't even understand what the word God meant or what creation meant unless you had some preconceived idea of what those concepts meant. So we do need the Bible, obviously, but we need more than the Bible. We need reason, we need creation, we need conscience in order to understand any of this. And the same is true when you're doing science. Science is a method we use to discover cause and effect inside the natural world. But in order to discover cause and effect inside the natural world, you need a scientist. And a scientist has to figure out what's he going to investigate. Then he's got to gather the data. Then he's got to interpret the data. All data needs to be interpreted. There are no self-interpreting facts. Who interprets the data? Science doesn't do it. Who interprets it? Scientists. Scientists. In fact, there's a chapter in the Stealing from God book, which again is not about tithing, okay? In the Stealing from God book, the chapter on science, the title of it is this: Science doesn't say anything, scientists do. Don't be afraid of science. Science doesn't say a word. Scientists say things. And many times scientists are interpreting the data based on their philosophical bias that God does not exist. They've already assumed God does not exist. You probably saw in the news like 2 weeks ago about the evolutionary discovery that, oh, we found another link in the chain and all this. You know why they say that? Because they've already assuming that evolution's true. They've already made the assumption. They think they have evidence, but the evidence is very bad. Even if the evidence was good, it wouldn't disprove Christianity. But the point here is they've ruled out God before they've ever looked at the evidence. So you can't do science without philosophy. Don't let people snow you on science. How many have heard of the name Immanuel Kant? Anyone in here heard of Immanuel Kant? Some of you have. Those who haven't heard of Immanuel Kant, he's actually influenced you more than you know. Here's what Kant's central theme of his philosophy was. He said, you can't know the real world. That's how you remember Immanuel Kant. He said, you can't know the real world. Why? Because he said, while there's a real world out there, when the phenomena from the real world gets to your mind categorizes it in such a way so you can't know the real world in itself. You can only know what your mind does to it. Leave it to a philosopher to come up with this. What's the problem with Kant's theory here? What would you say to Kant? What question would you ask him? Apply the claim to itself. What question would you ask him? Yeah, but you can't. You can say it that way. Kant says you can't know the real world, so you're going to ask him, then how do you know that about the real world? Why can Kant know about the real world, but we can't? Right? Why can Kant know, but we can't? See? It's a self-defeating proposition. He says he can know something about the real world, namely that you can't know anything about it, which is something, right? But we can't. And this is done all the time. Most modern philosophy buys into this error in Kant. And this is where you get the idea, by the way, that science is built on facts and faith or religion is values. You've probably heard of this. That anything about religion isn't really true, it's just your opinion. And anything about science and the hard data, that's really true. It's called the fact-value dichotomy. And this really arises out of Immanuel Kant, even though it's completely false. How about the skeptical claim, you should doubt everything? If someone would ever say this to you, what question should you ask them? Yeah, should I doubt that? You see, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice that? They don't doubt that. Now, by the way, Philip Johnson, who wrote a famous book in 1991 called Darwin on Trial, he started the modern called intelligent design movement, this group of scientists who are challenging Darwinistic dogma. And Philip Johnson, in one of his books, said this. He said a skeptic of one set of beliefs is a true believer in another set of beliefs. So a skeptic who says the Bible's false and there is no God, what does that skeptic believe about the world? Well, he believes that everything's made of molecules. That's a positive belief, right? He believes that we're just molecular machines. We're nothing but moist robots. Maybe not every atheist believes this, but this is the predominant view. They have positive beliefs. Now, they have to give evidence for their beliefs, right? Just like we have to give evidence for ours. So although they're skeptical of the Bible, they're not skeptical of materialism. They're not skeptical of evolution. They're not skeptical of what's called the multi-universe theory. We'll touch on it tomorrow. These are all their positive beliefs. So don't let people get away with saying, oh, I'm really skeptical. No, you're not. You may be skeptical of this, but you're not skeptical of that. In fact, how many people in here sometimes doubt what you believe? I don't care whether you're Christian or an atheist, somewhere in between, right? Yeah, I doubt. Look, I doubt quite a bit. I even wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and sometimes I doubt that it could be true. But when I start realizing or start considering my doubts, I realize the evidence for Christianity is quite good. And some days when I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Other days, a bad day, I don't know if this is true. Good day, everything's fine. Bad day, it might not be true. What's changed? Has the evidence changed? No, I've changed. Emotionally, I'm up. Emotionally, I'm down. I'm the one doubting. The evidence hasn't changed at all. So I realize when I look at the evidence, I go, this is really good evidence, you know. Maybe I ought to start doubting my doubts. Because if I start doubting my doubts, then I'm back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys thought about doubting your doubts? No, I doubt it. All right, this is the granddaddy of them all. You ought not judge. First of all, before we get into what Jesus said, what's the problem with the claim logically? Yeah, they're judging. So next time somebody says you ought not judge, put your hands on your hips and say, then why are you judging me for judging? Because that's what they're doing. Look, this is a judgment, isn't it? You ought not judge. Now, did Jesus just say you ought not judge and then he just stopped right there? A friend of mine, Greg Kokel, has a saying that he is very fond of saying, and it's a philosophy when he ever reads the Bible. He says, never read a Bible verse. Why? Why do you think he says that? You take it out of context really easily. You got to read around it, right? You got to figure out what it's talking about. Never read a Bible verse. Read all around it. Well, if you read all around the judge not passage, which starts in Matthew chapter 7, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It is a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem in your life, get it out of your life and then go help your brother. But it would be complete suicide to say don't make judgments. How many judgments have you made just today? Between right and wrong, good and evil, safe choices from dangerous choices. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. What judgments do atheists make? There is no God. There is no objective morality. There is no ultimate meaning. We all become worm food when we die. There's nothing. We dance to our DNA, as Richard Dawkins says. We're just molecular machines. We're moist robots. Those are all judgments. Everybody makes judgments. Even agnostics make judgments. They judge there's not enough evidence. That's a judgment. In fact, Jesus says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. John 7:24. Everybody has to make judgments. You have to judge whether God exists or not. You have to judge whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. Yet these are all judgments. Everybody makes them. The only question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And what did the Pharisees do? What was their job? Yes, they were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes, he went after the political leaders. They were on the Sanhedrin. Remember, Rome delegated most of the day-to-day lawmaking to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, which, by the way, sentenced Jesus to die. They delegated it. So Jesus is going after the politicians, and he's not so nice doing it. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, that guy is such a saint. He's never said a bad word about anyone. If that's the definition of a saint, Jesus was no saint. You just need to read. In fact, I saw this today, just in the hotel before I came over here. You know, they're covering the Pope, who's going all over the place. He's in Philadelphia today. He was in New York earlier today. And the commentator was going, from CNN was saying, or actually it was a priest saying that the pontiff isn't so much concerned about doctrine as he is about living your faith. Well, that is a doctrine, right? How you live is a doctrine. And if you don't think you ought to be concerned with doctrine, you haven't read 2 Timothy. Because all Paul says is, watch your doctrine closely, Timothy. Watch your doctrine. Preach the word. Correct false teachers. Now, I'm not saying you don't have to live it. You do. But don't ever say that doctrine isn't important. And Jesus went after these people who, although they may have been doctrinally pure, didn't live it. They certainly didn't. And when he went after them, he didn't pull any punches, did he? If you think Jesus was a nice guy all the time, you have not read Matthew chapter 23. What does he say in Matthew chapter 23 to these Pharisees? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make him a convert, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all just get along, boys and girls? No, he was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? Well, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter Q. Jesus was tough. And sometimes you got to be tough. Sometimes you just got to say straight out, this is right, this is wrong. You know who Jesus went after more than anyone? Were the religious people, right? He had a lot of grace, but he also had a lot of truth. And that's the tough thing to balance in our society, is balancing grace and truth. You have to have both. You can't have one without the other. You have to have grace and truth. I've noticed one other thing about judging, by the way. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody ever gets annoyed? Like if I say to Ken, gee, you did a great job organizing this. You think he's going to say, who do you think you are? Are you judging me? Do you think you're worse than me? He's never going to say that, right? See, I've noticed that people really don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. That's what they have a problem with. Because you can judge them all day by praising them up and down, and they're going to go, oh, that's great, thank you so much. But when you say the truth about something that they don't like, that they don't want to hear, then they start calling out the old don't you judge me card. Well, excuse me, you're judging me right now, aren't you? Now, there's many more of these that we could do. In fact, Augustine, when it comes to judging, said this: we love the truth when it enlightens us, we hate the truth when it convicts us. Think about that. We could do many more of these, but we've got to wrap it up here and get to your questions. But this Roadrunner tactic is an easy way for you to be a lie detector, because if you learn how to apply the claim to itself, you can be a lie detector, and it'll save you from going down these intellectual cul-de-sacs. You can pick stuff out and point out its faults right away. And this lie detector thing reminds me of Homer Simpson. Check this out.
Now we're going to run a few tests. This is a simple lie detector. I'll ask you a few yes or no questions, and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
Can everybody see that as a self-defeating statement, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, very good. Now, here's the truth about truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true, but everything can't be true. You can believe the earth is flat if you want. It's not going to make it flat. And objective truths can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says there are no objective truths out there. What should you say to them? Use the Roadrunner tactic. Say, is that an objective truth? If they say it is, then they've just defeated their statement. If they say no, it's just in me, the subject, which means there's no objective, unchanging referent to which this truth claim applies. In other words, it's just their opinion. You should say, then why should I believe it? See, you can't get away from objective truth. It's there. Well, actually, you can get away from it temporarily. How do you get away from truth temporarily? You suppress it. This is what Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1, that we suppress the truth and unrighteousness to go our own way. You see this all the time. We see it in ourselves. We do it sometimes too. You saw it politically recently. These Planned Parenthood videos have come out. Have you seen any of these? And what do some on the political left do? Instead of pointing out that we're actually tearing up babies in the womb and selling their body parts, instead of investigating Planned Parenthood for this, some on the political left are saying we ought to investigate the people who made these videos. Are you kidding me? That's suppressing the truth. Let's shut down the people who are telling the truth because it's politically inconvenient for us. In fact, Pascal put it this way. He said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Most people believe what they believe just because they find it attractive. In fact, I think the one question you ought to ask people who are not Christians is this question. This is the question I ask on college campuses in particular. Because when you call something, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, atheists are going to show up. And there's going to be some give and take during the Q&A. And if they come up to the microphone and they get a little bit hostile, I'll normally say, hey, can I ask you a question? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? On several occasions over the past few years, I've had atheists literally yell back at me, no! No, wait. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And you say no? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? I mean, you claim to be an atheist, a beacon of reason. Never mind if atheism's true, reason doesn't exist. Why? Because if we're just molecular machines, as I mentioned earlier, we're not reasoning anyway, we're just reacting, but let's leave that aside. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And you say no, how's that reasonable? It's not. The issue isn't here, the issue's here. They don't want it to be true. You see, most people are not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. They're going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. And here's the problem. Over the short term, you can make yourself happy by doing real stupid stuff. Over the long term, however, it's a disaster. The only way to get ultimate truth is to go straight through it. Ultimate happiness is to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So you might want to ask that question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? How do you think the people you know who are not Christians would answer that question? Are they on a relentless pursuit of truth? Or are they suppressing the truth because they think the truth, if that is true, they don't want anything to do with it because they don't want there to be a God. They want to be God. They want to do their own thing. I see this in myself. Half the time, I don't want there to be a God, right? Sometimes you go, it would be real convenient if there was no God right now. So there is truth out there. You can know it. The problem is we tend to suppress it. And so that's why we have to ask ourselves and our friends the question. By the way, this sword cuts both ways. Why? Because I can ask an atheist, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? But he could ask me, if atheism were true, would I become an atheist? And of course my answer would be yes. The problem is there's no way to know atheism's true. Why? Because again, if we're just molecular machines, we shouldn't trust anything we think. Every thought we have is a result of laws of physics, not because we're thinking. We're not reasoning to it. It's just the way it is. But we really ought to check ourselves. In fact, the atheistic physicist Richard Feynman said this, and he's right about this. He said, the easiest person to fool is who? Yourself. Because we all have a tendency to believe what we want to believe. In fact, my friend Jim Wallace, who Ken knows, in fact, I'm a substitute for Jim Wallace. He wanted to get Jim Wallace here. No, Jim is a great friend of mine. He's a cold case homicide detective. He was an atheist for the first 35 years of his life. And when he and I do these presentations together, at the end of the presentation, he'll go, I'm not a Christian because I wanted heaven. I'm not a Christian because I wanted to see my loved ones when I died, or I wanted eternal life, or any of these things. I'm a Christian because it's true. In fact, life was a lot easier when I was an atheist. I could do whatever I wanted when I wanted to do it. Now I've got these constraints. So, does truth exist? The answer is yes. It's self-defeating to say it doesn't. So Christianity could be true, but atheism could be true, right? Or some other non-Christian view could be true. Tomorrow we're going to get into does God exist, but before we get to your questions, we've got to go back to our friend Francis Crick, who looks again still creepy to me. What do you think? Remember his astonishing hypothesis? You remember this? That everything you think, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and associated molecules. Remember this? Can anyone see the problem with this statement now? Let me ask the question this way. Imagine if Crick had written in his book this. The astonishing hypothesis is that my scientific conclusions that I write in this book are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Would anyone in here believe anything he said? Now, can you see that this is self-defeating? This is like saying I can't speak a word of English. This is like saying there is no truth. This is like saying you ought not judge. This is like saying you should doubt everything. This is a self-defeating statement just like anything else. So you can show that materialism can't be true by simply using the law of non-contradiction. All right? So if you want more, the books and the DVDs are back there. Again, this is where you can get this presentation and much more. We'll do the rest of it tomorrow. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Okay? So you may want to sign up for that. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Don't forget radio, TV, and finally the app. I got to tell you about the app, because if you don't have the app, you need to get it. It's free. About 75,000 people have downloaded this thing already. And on the app, not only are all our radio programs on there, but there's a quick answer section. So it's filled with objections and answers to objections. So suppose you're having lunch with somebody one day and they say something that's against Christianity, but you're not quite sure how to answer it. You take out your iPhone, your Droid, your Windows phone, whatever you have, and you go to the cross-examined app, you go to the quick answer section, and chances are the objection they brought up we have an answer to right there on your phone. So you can say, hey, wait, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? Right? So download the app. It's free. Did I say it was free? It's free, okay? Cross-examine. Well, if you donate $15 to us, we'll give it to you for free. That's pretty good, Ken. All right, does anyone have any questions? Questions on anything? And since no one likes to ask the first question, let's move right on to the second question. Second question, you have a microphone too.
Yeah,
one over here too, okay.
Hey, if you'd like, we can bring the mic to you.
Yeah. Well, hand her the mic right behind you there. Yes, yeah, because they're in the back, they want to hear you. What's your name, ma'am? Hey, Debbie.
Were you always a Christian?
To my embarrassment, when I was born in bed with a lady who was naked. Can you believe that? That's how I started. And when I started, I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk. Doctor said it would be a year. Now look at me. It's a miracle. So yes, I believe in God. No, I was brought up in Catholic school because I lived in New Jersey, and by law in Jersey you have to go to Catholic school. I don't know if you know that. But no, I always believed in God. I just didn't know who Jesus was until I went into the Navy and I met the son of a Methodist minister, and he got me some Josh McDowell books. Evidence demands a verdict, More Than a Carpenter, and so I came to faith through apologetics, through evidence, after college. But I always believed in God. I just didn't know who Jesus was. Okay, Phil Donahue's over here. The younger version's right here. So if you have a question,
We'll bring it to you.
yeah, just put your hand up.
Smart crowd.
They know everything. That's right. Come on, I'm going to have to start telling jokes if you don't answer questions, and you don't want that to happen. So one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron. And the second atom said to the first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. It's my science joke. There's a question right there. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Don, and when
Don.
you are having your discussions with the atheists and you present these points and these arguments, what is their response?
Well, I mean, it depends on the argument. You know, atheists try and come at you from all different angles. None of them really work because they have to steal from God in order to argue against him. But most atheists are not what we call postmoderns or relativists. They believe truth exists. In fact, if you go to a local university, you go to Indiana University, you're not going to find relativists in the physics department, right? You're not going to find relativists in the biology department. You'll find relativists in the English department, you know, in the humanities. But the sciences, no, they believe there's truth. They think most truth comes from science. So they'll try and challenge the arguments for God. We'll see tomorrow. They try and say, well, maybe the quantum vacuum brought the universe into existence. Well, the problem is the quantum vacuum was brought into existence itself, so it can't be the cause of the entire universe. The quantum vacuum was something. It's not nothing. The universe came from nothing, as we'll mention tomorrow. So their arguments don't... People say, well, are there good atheists out there? They're good atheist debaters because they're good rhetorically, but they don't have good arguments. In the back there, or okay. Yes, either way. You're confusing Kyle now. He's trying to go both ways.
Well,
Yes.
basically, God is truth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he's the
And
standard
so-
of truth. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you believe in God, you believe in truth. And everything else is a lie. So you're either going to believe the truth or you're going to believe a lie.
All truth, God is truth, so all truth corresponds to his ultimate nature. And when we deviate from that, then it's sin or falsehood, yes. Gentleman in the back there. So. Phil, you've been retired.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Yes, sir.
So you're both that don't have enough faith to be an atheist. What is an atheist?
Well, atheist is someone who says there is no God. There are atheists now who are trying to claim that we don't say that, we just lack a belief in God. That's what they'll say now. And if you ever talk to an atheist today, they say, oh no, I just lack a belief in God. Now why is the atheist saying that? Well, the atheist is saying that because he doesn't want to have any burden of proof for his position. But to say an atheist merely lacks a belief in God means that that microphone stand is an atheist, right? Because that microphone stand it lacks a belief in God too. It means that everything that isn't a sentient being like a human being is an atheist, which isn't saying much. Also, atheists don't merely lack a belief in God. They have positive beliefs, as I mentioned earlier, in materialism. They think materialism's true. So traditionally, atheism is someone who asserts, or atheist is someone who asserts there is no God. Kyle, you give the mic back. He's got a follow-up.
Follow-up question. Do you believe there is such a thing as an atheist? If they claim to be an atheist, but they don't believe in God, do you really believe that they don't believe in God, or they're just using it as an excuse?
I think in many cases they're using it as an excuse, but I think some people out there truly don't believe in God anymore because, as Paul says in Romans chapter 1, which is a very critical chapter in the Bible, I've referenced it 3 times already, God gives them up to their own desires. And when he gives them up to their own desires, they continue down into depravity, into futile thinking. Ultimately, they don't even know God exists anymore because they're so far away from him. So everybody knows there's a creator God and a moral God because they have creation and conscience. But they can suppress that truth long enough that God ultimately gives them up to their own desires. And there may be what we call honest atheists out there now because they've given that up. If they're in that point, no, they're irredeemable once God gives them up. But we don't know who they are, right? We don't know who's redeemable and who isn't. So we treat everybody like they're redeemable. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the atheists are trying to take away the crosses out of high schools, junior high schools. How can they be so dead set against something they say doesn't exist?
Because what the atheists, really their motivation, let me put it this way. The elephant in the room, let me put it this way, I don't have a mic on anymore. Is this thing working? The elephant in the room is not evidence most of the time. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. People don't want it. And so atheists, and for example, Christopher Hitchens, whom I debated a couple of times. I don't know if you know who Christopher Hitchens was. He was a brilliant atheist, a British journalist who was very brilliant and had a British accent, so he sounded even more brilliant. Well, he and I had a couple of debates a few years ago. He actually died in 2011, not because he debated me, but he died. And these debates you can see on our website, crossexamine.org, and you could tell Hitchens was angry at God. You read his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. You know, he's just angry at God, and so, I don't know if it was in one of our debates, at some point he declared God was a cosmic North Korean dictator peering it down in on our sex lives. Now that's great imagery when you think about it, right? I mean, if you're an atheist, he was real brilliant to try and say God is looking down on everything and he's saying, do this and don't do this. And you know, that really gets us riled up because we're prideful and we want to do our own thing. So he was really mad at God, which is why I ended both debates this way. I said, you can sum up Christopher Hitchens' position in one sentence. Here it is. There is no God, and I hate him. See, he doesn't want there to be a God. And if you want to boil this down even further, then than morality and accountability. The new religion in America, and the new religion for many of these people, it's an old religion, but it's been resurrected. It's, no pun intended, it's the religion of sex. If you notice, all the cultural debates we have are all about sex. That's the religion. That's the religion of America. Everything is about my personal autonomy and my personal satisfaction sexually. That's why many atheists, when you ask them if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? They say no. In fact, there's a section in Stealing from God, which is not about tithing. And there's a section in there called Sleeping with Your Girlfriend. Because a friend of mine, who's a pastor of a big church in Charlotte, one day was speaking on the evidence against the atheists who were trying to say Christianity was false. He was talking about why the new atheists were false and what they were saying. And after the sermon, some kid comes up to him and he goes, hey, you know, I used to be a Christian and now I'm an atheist. He said, I'm an agnostic now and you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And David said, what do you mean I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing? He said, you shouldn't be saying the atheists are wrong. That's not loving. Jesus said to love. And David said, you have to have love and truth. You have to balance grace and truth. Love without truth is a watery, borderless mess. Truth without love is too harsh. You have to have both. And so the kid brought up an objection to Christianity, and David began to answer it. And before he was done answering the objection, the kid was on to another objection. And then David would begin to answer that, and then the kid's on to another objection. You ever have someone like this? Well, what about this? And you start answering, and they go, what about this? And then what about this? And before you know it, they're not really interested in the answer, are they? And so David just looked at him and he said, forgive me, but you're not listening to anything I say. I think the reason you say you're an agnostic now is because you're sleeping with your girlfriend. Am I right? And he just froze because he knew that was it. The problem wasn't here. The problem was here. He didn't want it to be true. Yes, sir.
So how would you answer to a person or individual whose daddy or whose granddaddy who hasn't had a chance to hear the gospel? Because in my case, let's say I'm from Burma.
Yeah.
This gospel was preached about 100 years ago.
Okay.
So how about my granddaddy's dad who hasn't had a chance to hear the gospel?
Okay, so the question is, what about those that have never heard?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
They would bring up that, well, God is not fair.
Okay. That's an excellent question. In fact, let's take a closer look at that one. What about those who've never heard? Right? First of all, Christ's sacrifice is necessary for salvation. Why is Christ necessary for salvation? Why can't you just be good and get to heaven? Why not? First of all, because no one's good. Right? Secondly, if you sinned once, you're already deserving of punishment. And so God is infinitely just, which means he has to punish sin, but he's also infinitely loving, which means he doesn't want to. He wants to accept you as you are. So what does he have to do? In order to remain just and to be the justifier, Romans 3:26, God has to punish an innocent substitute in his place. And the only innocent substitute, he can't find out here because we're all sinners. He has to be the substitute. He comes to earth, puts flesh over his deity, and he pays the price for us. So his sacrifice is necessary. Now, do you have to know that Jesus is the sacrifice in order to be saved? Not in the Old Testament, you didn't, right? They didn't know who Jesus was, but his sacrifice still saved them. So, some argue they can be saved by Christ's sacrifice if they seek God even though they don't know the name of Jesus, like the Old Testament saints. There are Christians who claim this. I think that's possible, but I think the more biblical answer is that God will get seekers the truth about Christians so they can be saved. An example of this is in Acts 10, right? Here's a believer in God, the Ethiopian eunuch, and God sends Peter over there to save the guy. He already believed in God, but he didn't know who Jesus was. You say, well, there may be people, like you say, your granddad, right? Okay. It could be that God has so ordered the world that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. We all know that there are people out there who hear the gospel and don't believe it, right? Just about everybody outside these, most of our society now doesn't believe it. Well, a majority anyway. But what we don't know is, what about those who have never heard? Is it possible that if they had heard, they never would have believed it anyway? That's possible, right? And where do we get this idea from? Because it comes from Acts chapter 17, when Paul's on Mars Hill talking to the Athenians, who are not believers. He says this, "From one man God made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out and find him, though he's not far from any one of us." In other words, God is ultimately going to be just, right? He is the standard of justice. So nobody's going to go to heaven who should go to hell, and nobody should go to hell, will go to hell who should go to heaven. But it's quite possible that since God is in charge of everything, that the people who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. Or is it possible that at the very end, if nobody else got your granddad the gospel, that Jesus came to him in his last day and appeared to him? Possible. We don't know, right? This is happening in Muslim countries. I know it is because I have friends who it's happened to. So the bottom line is we rest in the justice and love of God. We can't unscramble eggs, right? The world is scrambled up. And what we do is we know what does save people, so we risk all to get them the gospel. And we trust in the grace and mercy of God for those we don't get to. Anybody else? Up in the front. The next question must come from the back of the room to keep Kyle walking.
You should see
Yes.
him run.
Huh?
You should see him run.
I should?
Yeah, he's a champion runner.
Are you?
Wins lots of races.
Oh.
My question is, in the public schools now, they're teaching grade schoolers that science is fact and religion is, what's the right
All right,
word?
stop right there. Whose fault is that? If Christians were engaged and voted, none of this would be going on right now.
Yeah, well, my question's along that line, I guess. It's permeating our society, and my question is, what's the best way to deal with this institutionalized secularism, which is really, in the end, atheism?
The best way to deal with it is what we're doing here tonight. Apologetics, getting people equipped, and then we just need some courage. As Winston Churchill said, courage is the first of all virtues, because if you don't have courage, you won't do anything else. We need to get out there and get involved. The problem is we're just too comfortable, and we'll just let the world tumble around us. I noticed, however, driving in here, that Bedford Middle School down the road here has a sign that says, it had the most bizarre sign. It said, September is National Whole Grain and Piano Month. And then right under it, it said, God bless America. Did you notice that? How do they put those two things together? It's National Whole Grain and Piano Month. I don't get it. So we just got to be engaged. We just have to get involved. We have to be salt and light, as Jesus said. Yes, ma'am.
I have a childhood friend who her mother was murdered.
Ooh.
And her father was involved in drugs and would lock her in the closet and do terrible things while she was in the closet. And my question is, we've had kind of debates about whether there is a God or not. And she said, if there is a God, then that's just really sad. Because where was he? And
Yes.
she's actually today, she hops from college to college. She's a university professor, so it's very hard to debate with her. She has a degree in logic, which is ironic. But how do you approach someone who is just sad?
Yeah.
You know.
Robbie, you guys, anyone know who Robbie Zacharias
Yes.
is? Okay. Robbie Zacharias has a very wise saying. He says, whenever you're answering a question, remember you're answering a person. In fact, I was talking about this with Mike in the car today, that there are, on this question, there's two answers to it. There's the academic answer and the pastoral answer. This calls for the pastoral answer, not the academic answer. Because someone could be standing on a microphone saying, if there's a good God, why is there evil? Well, there's an academic answer to that. But they could be standing on that microphone saying, if there's a good God, why is there evil? because their baby just died 2 months ago? There's a different answer to that question, right? The intellectual answer, because that's the kind of, I'm not a pastor, okay? The intellectual answer to this is, if evil exists, God exists. Why is that, do you think? Because quite frequently it's put the other way. If evil exists, God doesn't exist. But the truth of the matter is, if evil exists, God exists. Why? What were you going to say? Okay, God is the standard. Okay, God is the standard of good. We'll talk about this more tomorrow. God is the standard of good, which makes any deviation from that standard possible. If there's no standard of good, then you can't say anything's evil. So the question is, why would God sit back and allow this evil to occur? Is the real question. It's not that God doesn't exist. Why would he sit back and allow evil to occur? That's the question. And the answer to that is, we don't obviously know all the reasons why, but we know why we don't know why. Because we're finite and he's infinite. And there's something known as the ripple effect. Have you ever heard of the ripple effect? That, also called chaos theory, that a butterfly flapping its wings in South Africa can create a series of events which ultimately leads to a hurricane off of New Orleans. We can't trace all those events, but it's a ripple effect. It goes through and affects so many other events. And someone will say, well, why did someone murder my mother? Or why did God allow it to occur? Well, first of all, he allows free will, right? If he allows free will, then he has to allow evil to occur, because if he doesn't allow evil to occur, we don't really have free will, do we? We can only do good. Well, that's not free if we can't do evil. And secondly, we might not see the ripple effect of that event and how it ripples into the future and affects so many trillions of other events. Maybe partially because of that event, a great evangelist is born 500 years from now and saves millions of people. We can't see that good coming from it, but God can. He allows evil to occur. He can bring good from it. In fact, we even see this in the scriptures. We see when Joseph is sold into slavery. You know the story. He goes and he gets in power in Egypt, and then his family, who tried to kill him basically and sell him into slavery, comes to Egypt to try and get help from the famine, get food because they're in famine. And Joseph says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, the saving of many lives, which is occurring right now. They wanted to do evil to Joseph, and they did, but it ultimately led to good. All this ripple effect idea led the pastor of the church in Paris called Notre Dame 150 years ago to say this. He said, if you were to give, or if God were to give me his power for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make. But if God would give me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are. So if she's hurt and upset about this, which she should be, she's actually, and she really thinks it's evil, she actually has a very good argument for God. Because if she's upset and she's not calling it really evil, then what's she complaining about? Right? So you have to have a pastoral conversation with her. In fact, in the book, Stealing from God, which is not about tithing, there's a whole chapter on this. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, one other thing. Obviously, if you can, you want to stay in this person's life. Does she claim to be an atheist? Okay. I can almost guarantee you this, that in the future when something bad happens again, and we're all going to have suffering in our lives, it's going to happen at some point. If you have stayed in her life and you've been an example to her and someone who's loved her, at one point after this tragedy occurs again in her life, your phone's going to ring and she's going to be on the other end. She's not going to call her atheist friends. What do they have to offer? That's right. Right? She's going to call you. And then when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. You'll be the teacher.
Amen.
Are we done? We're done? You got to go to bed? Woo! It's Saturday night in Bedford, Indiana, ladies and gentlemen. You guys got a curfew? 9 o'clock? All right, well, Pastor Gary, Pastor Ken, who's going to close us out here? Pastor Ken will close us out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, see you tomorrow, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we urge you to come back tomorrow. Come back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Listen to what he has to say to you about the kids and what they're going to face. Come back tomorrow night. Don't miss any of these opportunities. These are amazing, terrific opportunities. Very rare we get to hear teaching like this. So thank you all for coming. And don't forget to go out that way. Buy some books. Dr. Turek will be out there, I imagine, at the book stand. I imagine he'll sign your book. So...
Actually, Carmen's been signing all the books. She's got better penmanship.
No, don't say that. All right. Well, you're dismissed. Thank you.